Welcome back to Talking Cities with Matt Enstis and friends. We are happy to be getting back into providing you with cultivating conversations as we discuss healthier, more sustainable communities and explore the beauty and creativity in it all. As you can see, I've added friends to the podcast name, so I'll not be your only host, but you will be educated and entertained by some of our team's thought leaders. On this week's episode, the BNMC Director of Inclusion and Community Initiatives, Kyria Stevens, sits with Talia Rodriguez, Associate Director of the Westside Promise Neighborhood, and Rachael Ireland, Social and Community Engagement Specialist at Rich Products. As anchors in the fight against hunger, Talia and Rachael sat with Kyria to discuss their roles at the intersection of food access, understanding that food is culture, and that there is another language spoken by almost all community residents, the language of food. As a fifth-generation Buffalonian, Talia is responsible for facilitating the relationships that help feed those in need throughout the West Side. And because of her upbringing, she understands that the issue of food insecurity is often compounded by certain social realities. Listen in as the ladies discuss ways they are helping to improve access to food for those who need it most. Let's dive in. Welcome to Talking Cities.
Hello, everyone. This is Kyria Stevens, Director of Inclusion and Community Initiatives for Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus, and I am so excited today because I have Talia Rodriguez and I have Rachael Ireland here, and we're going to have a great conversation. So before I get into anything, I just want to have you guys just kind of introduce yourself, and I'll start with Rachael. You can just tell us about yourself. Just give us 101 of who's Rachael.
Awesome. I ask myself that question every morning and hopefully come up with the same answer. Such a pleasure to be with you all. My name is Rachael Ireland, and I'm the Social Impact and Community Engagement Specialist for Rich Products. Mm-hmm. My husband and I are lifelong Buffalonians and are very dedicated to our community in all aspects. I'm really privileged to be able to take my personal purpose and apply it at work every day, serving our community in a number of facets, and looking forward to the conversation.
All right. Talia.
My name is Talia Rodriguez. I am Associate Director of what's called the Westside Promise Neighborhood, which is anchored at SUNY Buffalo State University in the Office of Civic and Community Engagement. Very much like Rachael, I am a lifelong Buffalonian and dedicated to our community.
Great. So I'm going to just throw this softball here to you guys. What do you think, in your experience, because you guys are both in civic engagement, but before we get into that, tell me about what your perspective of Buffalo is right now. Having grown up here, what does Buffalo mean to you? What is Buffalo like? And where do you see Buffalo going?
Kyria, that is such a hard question to start with. And so many answers, right? I think that Buffalo is the most beautiful community. We have tremendous people and talent and culture here. And it is truly a privilege to be part of this community, to navigate between it every day. I feel like being in Buffalo means being a lifelong learner, right? Understanding the different ways that we've come to be where we are and the potential we have to go in the future. And I think a big part of that opportunity we have is tremendous continued collaboration and learning across the community. So I'm really excited and energized by the direction of travel that we're moving in and the opportunity for us to do so in a collaborative way.
So I'm going to second everything that Rachael said and also add just like Buffalo to me is kind of akin to like, I always say it's a long table, but like maybe a long table with really good food and art on top, right? Yes. That's like ever changing. One of the things I love about Buffalo, and this is part and parcel in the work that Rachael embodies and also with our friends over at Rich's, is like innovation. Like Buffalo is ever changing, and that's not like, it doesn't change too fast. I feel like it changes fast enough where like the history is considered, like all of the beautiful people who have given, but like that it is like this constant evolution of things and people and places. Like it's eclectic.
Yeah. So you say, you guys, food. It's a long table with food.
Yes, always food.
Yes.
You guys are both involved in food. Can you talk to me a little bit about what food means to you and how you are involved in making sure that people have access to that?
Yeah, I'll take that one first. So food embodies being a good neighbor to me, right? So that's a lot how our neighbors either express themselves or express their culture and or help each other and serve each other. And then I think for me, it's also now an area where I see a lot of my neighbors exerting leadership. So it is this intersection for me that kind of really overlaps a lot of our values, even art, like we mentioned. But I feel it's an area where there's increased civic advocacy, and I'm very grateful for my small role in the ecosystem that Buffalo is supporting.
So you're talking about the leadership. What does that mean? You said that a lot of your neighbors are taking leadership. What does that mean to you?
Yeah.
How are they doing that?
So one of the ways is just like by claiming space. So one of the things that I think we're starting to understand better is that each culture kind of has like their meal that they contribute to the fabric of the West Side. So like, I'm just going to say it wrong, but like sambosa, like I love that. It's like basically un pastelillo, but everybody has like their contribution, their portion. And for me, like what that leadership means once they share their food is really personal to their community and where their communities are at, both in home in the West Side and in the larger international conversation, because, you know, the West Side, specifically Buffalo, is a very international place.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't want to follow that up. I think, Talia, you spoke about food and its meaning to us individually and as families and as a culture and community so beautifully. And food is community, right? It's the sense of being around the table together. We often think of food being a convening space around celebration and celebratory. And I think, when we talk about food and food access, Kyria, we have to talk about dignity, right?
Yeah.
Choice is dignity. So when you have a choice of what you eat and how you access it, in foods that are culturally relevant and significant to you, that's dignity, being able to have that choice. And I think something I really love about when you talk to people in our community about food is the expression that they bring to talking about recipes or family traditions or new discoveries. It is such a meaningful and engaging experience to talk to someone about food, because if you really listen and you watch them, they're elated.
Yeah, I completely agree. One of the things that is really important to BNMC is how we integrate networks. And there's, Buffalo has little pockets and communities that are really special, and how, we want to create cultural collisions. And there's one of the really great ways to do that is food. So talk to me about how food, especially being at Riches, like talk to me about how food is one of, how you're using food to integrate those networks and bring communities together.
Yeah. So I think that, we are so, I like to think, centralized to the Western New York community and play a significant role in being part of this community that people forget we're a global company. Mm-hmm. We have locations and associates all across the world, which provides this tremendous opportunity for us to be learning on a global scale about how we can better meet people's food needs and food interests. And a lot of that is really, really being very intentionally present in the communities in which we live, work, and play, not just here in Western New York, but all over the world. So being engaged with our communities and asking their food preferences, understanding what's culturally relevant and inclusive to them, and being able to provide that. And I think one of my favorite roles about my work and with Talia is being out in the community and working with young people especially, and helping them discover new foods, and then understanding and seeing how they innovate with that food, right? So it could be something very simple and central to us as non-dairy whipped topping, and all of a sudden you put that in front of a child and they do something completely new and different with it that just blows my mind every time. And I wish I could to tap into that creative energy in just a millisecond of a second.
Yeah. Talia, tell me a little bit about, because when I first reached out to you, I really wanted to talk to you, and you mentioned bringing Rachel, and I was like,
of course.
Yes, of course. So tell me a little bit about the work you're doing and how you guys are working together. Sure. And what that means.
Sure. And then before I do that, I just wanted to answer the last question more completely and talking about leadership. So after the act of violence, my neighbors like Mark Talia and like others have put out stronger roots in understanding how we historically support each other, and then how we can be innovative going forward. So I want to lift up leaders like him and like leaders who are coming organically from our community, like Alex with African Food Heritage Co-op and others, and how their leadership and me watching, right, my neighbors process and do it in a way that's transparent and authentic has helped me better place myself in the food leadership network. And I think it's a similar answer, right? So just watching very strong leaders, even though they're a corporation, I always knew about them. Yeah. And it was just like this wonderful thing to kind of be able to take my work from a planning perspective, because they were always at some of the planning tables that I was sitting at, to working with them more intimately. So how our work is linked is Buffalo State University has an anchor institution initiative, which is basically like we're a big neighbor and we want to be a good big neighbor. And that's both economically, socially, historically, with so many different lenses. And Riches is very supportive of their anchor work, also sees themselves, I think, as an anchor institution, or at least I do, for my neighbors. And I feel like our work is linked there, but also through the West Side Promise neighborhood. So they actually fund part of my position, and Buffalo State matches the other. And it's been this amazing opportunity to really empower my neighbors and to go into the community and ask what's already happening and how we might be able to add, both from a campus perspective and with our friends like Rachael.
Yeah. Well, you guys are really in a space where you're serving and helping people a lot. And I really want to ask you what was your journey individually? What was your journey that led you into advocacy? We're on a diversity, equity, inclusion board together at United Way. You guys are doing so much for the community. What has been the impetus? Like, what sparked that in you? What did it start? Where did it start? Tell me about that.
So my story really starts with my family's own legacy in the food system. So many of my relatives, both on my mom's and dad's side, because I'm biracial, they were food workers. So they were either farm workers, they grew food, or they had a role in it. That transferred to a passion for eating that has I've carried with me to work. And I think for me, I kind of started to discover food policy when I started asking my relatives where our food stamps were coming. So I was on Massachusetts, wanting to get our food stamp book, aging myself, looking at everyone in the room, because there were books back in the day earlier, because everyone on our block got food stamps at the same time. And then there was a lot of like food tension at the store. So I remember just sitting there asking myself questions like, where do these food stamps come from? How do I get them earlier? And kind of just wanting to understand my place in the social benefit allocation system. That led to a political science degree, a master's degree in public policy, and a law degree, and a couple stints with government. But I've answered my question, and I've since helped some of my neighbors build stronger systems like food pantries and summer lunch sites. So it's a very humbling thing to be able to help feed people.
Yeah.
Talia, I've had the privilege of hearing your story a number of times, but I'm always so inspired by your story and how it has and continues to inform the work, and as we learn and navigate together in the community. I don't know whether I found food or food found me, but we continue to be together in a lot of ways. Yeah. But I think, I am sitting here in this place of privilege with gratitude to my parents. My mom was a county social worker and my dad was in business, and I like to think that I've ended up with this perfect balance of both of them, of understanding, how we can operate from business perspective and doing things within the community. But first and foremost, not losing sight of this human element, this need to act always with compassion and empathy for our neighbors, with a thoughtfulness of other before self, in that being really the foundation that guides our decisions and our actions. And I think when you in life find a place where you can work in which you're able to live out your personal values to that extent in such a meaningful way, it is beyond privilege.
Yeah. You mentioned, you guys keep talking about like social and humanity and those things. When it comes to Buffalo, and we talked about the different pockets in these communities and how there's different foods and different cultures, just frankly, sometimes it can cause us to be insular and kind of to be very siloed. Talk to me about ways that you are trying to bring these cultural collisions that we mentioned before, and how are you trying to integrate these networks? What are some things, some challenges that you've faced, and how are you overcoming them right now?
So I could say programmatically with WISPN threefold. So one, we have a leadership program that started off to be designed part and purpose for folks in the West Side, but because of my personal network and just like the way that I organize, it's really been expanded to people from across the city. So that has been an incredible teaching tool for me because I'm engaging with advocates who have histories that are personal to them and to the community that I've never either heard or have been shared with other people. That's also multi-generational, which is in my version, the best type of learning environment. So we have people who are like 65 and people who are 17, and often they do not agree on certain things. But when you put the transgender unicorn in front of everyone and you give everybody this opportunity to kind of maybe learn different tools or learn about different communities that they don't historically learn about, it's a really universally humbling experience. So we have our WISPN leadership program. We also have extended WISPN, so the West Side Promise neighborhood. We do a lot of food advocacy. And Rachel's really good at coaching me about like making sure I document the work, because I think for all of us, it goes pretty fast and you're always on to the next project. So part of what that is a continuation of a commitment from our friends at SUNY to document food stories. So we have a podcast where I know we're so excited, where we bring people forward to talk to them about what their experience is with food. And we ask everybody, I have one prompt. So academic pre-reflection is part of like what my academic focus is. And we ask everybody, when did you realize that food was a scarce resource for yourself or others? Mm-hmm. And then we allow people to either answer that question and tell their story or work backwards. So we have that opportunity, which is on the radio 91.3. Mm-hmm. And I learned this through, I think, the Buffalo History Channel. 91.3 is like a big deal. So I didn't realize, with present company included, like Buffalo media makes history. So I was super, super excited to go into that realm. And then also with our Food Security Council, it's open to the public. So we meet bi-monthly, I think at this point, but we allow calls for collaboration from anywhere. And we also have a newsletter where anyone can tell their story about what they're doing. Leaders like Carlandra, leaders like those folks who are coming from most valuable parent, like they've been huge supporters to us. Those weren't folks who I listed on my list of natural West Side intersections when I first started the leadership program, but I'm happy to say, I've learned from.
Yeah, I love that.
Talia, I continue, every time I hear you speak, I continue to be a listener when I'm in your company.
She helps tremendously. She's very humble.
No.
She does.
No, just amazing. I think it is so significant and important for us to be present, right? And when we talk about being present in our communities, that is both singular and plural, to be appreciative and understanding and aware of what we are as a holistic community, and then to understand what those differences and those beautiful, unique features are of our individual neighborhoods and communities, right? When we talk about food, it can become very complicated very quickly because that is a basic necessity. Food is survival, but food is also celebration and community and togetherness. So it becomes very personal. It's not simply just giving people a meal. So I think when we think about that, it is always stepping into spaces and places, asking questions about what that neighborhood and what that community wants to see for themselves, and not making assumptions about what they need, right? So it could be something as simple as thinking innovatively to food solutions. And this is a lot of things I've learned from Talia, being present and navigating through our communities. But when we think about something like a holiday drive, right? Should I go there with rotisserie chicken?
Yes.
We think about giving out turkeys. It is this beautiful gift, but then you have to step back and ask yourself the right questions. Does that family then have the right cooking tools and utensils to be able to prepare or to safely store that turkey? Culturally, are they able to eat turkey? Is it a food that they want to eat? And those questions are not limited to specific neighborhoods or people, right? We should be asking questions around food choice and dignity anytime we're stepping into service around food.
So when we're talking about food, and we probably should have had Beth sitting on this because you guys know Beth, and she's just
amazing.
We have a food is medicine symposium.
Yes.
So talk to me about how people are using food nowadays, because food affects our health, and there's huge health disparities. Talk to me about how the food at Riches and the food access that you're working on, Talia, how is that transforming communities? How is that helping people to live healthy? And how is that making people just think differently about how they're eating?
Yeah, so I would say summer lunch is a place where I sought food resource. We have so many littles at summer lunch. So summer lunch, for those of you who are listening who may be unaware, is a place of congregate eating at 18-year-olds or under. You can come to several city points throughout the city and access meals. So for me, getting food into the hands of mothers who need the food today is really important. Second, being able to tell them it's free. Third, being able to tell them we'll be there the following day. So relieving some of the stress that has a physiological impact on my neighbors related to food access is really important. I'm like waving my hand, so I see my microphone shaking. And the second thing I think that's really important relative to how is it changing communities is changing a conversation. So I'm Latina. I come from, my grandmother had a sugarcane plantation and a third grade education. It's hard for me to go into policy spaces and remind myself people like me were not traditionally present. Voices like mine have not been heard. And to be able to help my colleagues be allies and also be able to kind of navigate that from an emotional, social, and historical perspective, you know, because things that, and I talk to Rachael about this all the time, things that may be obvious to me, right, because of my lived experience or how I may feel about the biomedical system, knowing my own family and culture's history, make me hesitant, right? Like I always tell people the word researcher makes me nervous. And as a Puerto Rican, I feel like it's okay for me to say that. Yeah. But what is changing is being able to confront those social realities and our histories about health and make them people focused so that they can become friendlier and our communities can engage in the conversation with equity.
You want to jump in that, or because I have another question?
Please jump in.
Okay, so you talk about how researcher might be a scary thing, and I can understand that as it coming from the African American community, where a lot of the times where you said when people were doing research, they were doing research on us. We were the
not with us, not with us. Right, we're different now.
So how are you bridging the gap between the history or the stigma of or the hesitancy and bringing it into something where it can be beneficial and we can participate in that? What is that process like? How are you doing that? Because that's a hard thing.
Yeah. For one, I think as a Latina with a doctorate, I think 0.6% of us nationally have them. So when I am with my colleagues who are doctors, who have the position to train medical students like Sarah Ventry, shout out to her, and other folks, I make sure that I have honest conversations with them. And I'll be like, hey, Sarah, this or that makes me nervous, or this or that, I'm not sure why. Could you give me feedback, right? So identifying myself as an ally to people who are in the present field, one. Two, also changing language. So I'm very sensitive about language, and we talk about empowering our neighbors on purpose, because when we talk about empowering, the empowerment is an action of health, right? Empowerment is an idea that we're investing in you and what you can contribute both physically and mentally other places. So for me, Rachael and I always talk about empowering our neighbors. We don't use othering language because I think that that's important, and I think people pick up those subtle things.
What is othering language?
Othering language is, so much language makes me nervous. So much language makes me nervous, but othering language, I feel like, in my very basic definition, is language that, whether it's intentional or not, makes folks in the room who may be other than the homogeneous group that's expressing their opinion feel lesser or less powerful, if that's a good way to say it. Okay, and then the third thing that I'm trying to do is connect my people with money and finances and policy and lift up people who are doing the work. So there's a lot of stuff I don't do, but like leaders like Tyrin and others who are doing, Latinas who are in STEM, right? Yeah. So telling my community, it's okay to trust Roswell. You know, Crystal's going to be there. It's important to make sure that we lift up these people who are walking into the systems that need change. So kind of threefold, but I feel like I probably don't do as much as I could in that area as an academic. So a lot of it too is then history, right? So days of social justice observance and or placing our community and letting folks know, you know, the I Have a Dream speech was not that far away.
So I'm gonna get to you in a second, but you said you don't do as much as you could. Like, what are the things that you feel you could be doing that are
probably
really
publish as an academic, as a Latina in higher ed? I haven't published anything, and I've talked to Rachael a lot about that, about making sure that our work is shareable. I do have a presentation on Friday at at Gannon University in Pennsylvania, and I did have our neighbors' work presented in San Diego for a national convention, but I've not published any articles about our neighbors or anything that we've been doing.
Yeah, that's
selfishly. Sorry.
That's so important, because having your face as representation matters, and people seeing that, not just for little girls who might look like you, but people who don't look like you, being able to see that we do exist is really important. Yeah. I want to shift over to Rachel. So you're what is your title again for Rich Products?
Yeah, Social Impact and Community Engagement Specialist.
So what does that mean to communities? How are you connecting with communities? And I'll just leave it there. How are you connecting with communities?
Yeah, that's a great question. I like to think that that's 99.9% of my job, right? It's being present. It is meeting incredible people like yourself and Talia, and understanding the unlimited, vast number of resources we have in this community, being hungry to learn, hungry to be continuously learning about what's happening in our community and continuously present. And that often means stepping into spaces and places that there is really incredible work happening that you could learn from and listen in on, and understand where there's collaborative space to be part of it, or to provide suggestions or innovative ideas, or to be a convener or connector, right? To say, hey, you're doing some great work over here, Talia. Could you meet with this person? Like, I think you both need to have a conversation. And I think that can be a really significant role that we play, as a company operating in this community, and as an individual in this role, to just be stepping into collaborative space all the time. I wish my brain would turn off, but I think my best ideas come between 2 and 4 a.m., much to the suffering of my husband and dog. But
there's a good puppy mom.
I try. There's a long list of just unending collaboration. I think that can happen because there are so many people across our community doing the work in a way that they are committed, passionate, and heartfelt in doing it.
Can I just add to her answer? So there isn't a lot of conversations I have where I meet new folks where I don't say you have to meet Rachel. Because I think for me, what Rachel does is kind of helps me better place our work in the larger universe of business also, because she brings like both of those dynamics. So like I was just really proud to sit next to her and to continue this work together.
So you guys are both influencers. You share your influence. You bring Talia into your network, and she does the same thing for you. When you talk about being in community, sometimes, like Talia mentioned, and I just had another conversation with someone else, and they said sometimes that there are only women in the space, or they might be the only person of color in the space. When you're going into community, are there times where you might be the only white woman in the space? And how do you become comfortable in that space? Are you comfortable? How do you even get into those spaces like that?
I can answer. So as a biracial person, I identify myself, and a lot of people are surprised by that. They're like, well, why'd you tell us? And I'm like, because I have to, right? Like I have to claim the part of my family that I'm very proud of, but that has a complex history with America, especially because they came on the Mayflower. So that's pretty early out. I think the other thing too is by centering and saying other voices like need to go first. So I'm going to be the last person to speak, especially if it's a learning moment for me. So I always feel like when I'm in those rooms and if they're about diversity and the folks that are talking aren't the people that the workshop is aimed for, that's usually a bad sign. So I try to quiet myself. And then 2 is lift up the people who don't get as much playtime as me from other communities. Because just because I'm there, I might know someone, that's a privilege. And specifically to males, right? Latino males and the role that we have played as government in silencing them. It's really important to me that I am an ally for all genders, but I'm very hyper aware of that I don't speak for my entire community, so that I might need someone else there, and that's okay. That's, I think, the best part of having these conversations be like a living classroom.
Yeah. So Rachel, how do you find those spaces, and then how do you get into them? Like, what is that? How is that process for you?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I'm grateful to Talia to listen in your answer and to have a little bit of time to think about it myself, candidly. It's people, right? Like, I think when you show up genuinely and authentically to conversations with a willingness to listen, you create safe space where people want to be in collaboration. And when you step into those spaces, you know, I hope that my intention in every room I step in is to create that safe space for someone else where they feel welcomed and heard and important. Whatever, it does not matter what your title is, what your salary is, what your experience is. You matter and you're important, and I'm here to listen and learn with you. And I think the more you show up, right, you just show up. Like, show up where you are needed or where you are asked to be. You build that trust, that sense of trust. And that trust goes very far in making new introductions in our community. And Talia is tremendous at that, and opening these doors for me to meet new people and new experiences in our community so we can be present and understand where we can create convening space, collaborative space, and bring resource to need.
Yeah. So, you know, we often talk about safe space, and then that safe space turned into a brave space.
Yes.
Or a cringe space.
Depending
on the vibe of the day, the title of the workshop, and what is being served.
Right. So you know, you never know where that's going to go. So my question is, when it comes to bringing people together, and I often say this, you'll hear, you know, I'm going to say this in probably every podcast, people's mind think where their feet stand. Mm-hmm. And if they've only been in a certain space, then all they know is that. And you find that on both sides of the fence or on every side of the mountain, I like to say. But so how are you thinking of bringing those spaces together? How are you creating or inviting people to those tables? And what is that process for you? For someone who isn't in the space of social impact or food access or social justice or any of those things, what are the things that they can do to either be invited to the table or create those tables where people can come in and start to talk and share and integrate those networks? How are you doing that, and what would you tell people to do that?
How am I doing that? I'm nosy, right? So like things exist in different places, or like there'll be a new shop on Grant and I'll just poke my head in. Mm-hmm. I'm like, hi, I'm Talia. And they're like, and I'm like, and it depends. Like, tell me all about you and what you're doing. So I think, to answer your question concisely, what we need to do is just be open. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of amazing people in Buffalo who twofold. One, are doing amazing things, but maybe we don't know about them. And we is just all our collective we, right? And two is who have done amazing things that we haven't told their stories yet. Mm-hmm. And I think those two things are together, right? So I think it's two things, is inviting those folks to the table who say, hey, you should have been sitting next to me for 15 years, but here's this seat and I'm gonna pull out the chair for you. Mm-hmm. And then two is like literally going to places of community and just asking, mm-hmm. like, hey, who's up next? Or is there anything you need help with?
But that could be, you have a very outgoing,
that can be intimidating for people.
Yeah,
of course.
Extroverted personality.
Yeah.
How for a person who doesn't have that, like what can I do to kind of overcome that fear? Maybe I'm not as open.
You're always going to be scared.
Yeah.
If you're doing something different, right, you're always going to be scared. But to answer your question also concisely, I would say LinkedIn has been a place of tremendous resource for me. Mm. And we have some amazing people, and some of you are at the table, right, who I follow on LinkedIn. So if you're looking for an opportunity, I would try to articulate it there, right? And or if you are someone, like again, the folks at the table, and this is me talking to myself, reflection, right? Like writing a bit about what you're doing and sharing it there. So I would say joining the platforms where there's a lot of business activity, and also keeping your ear out to creatives, mm-hmm. because so much business is done in the city of Buffalo, but in creative art spaces, and people really underestimate that.
Yeah, you guys have talked about how Buffalo is a big long table with food and art. So you mentioned, Talia, pulling out the chair. I'll ask you, Rachel, what does that mean to pull out the chair for the table? Pull out the chair from the table for persons that might not be from the same space you are in.
It means so much, and it means everything, right? I think fundamentally it means meeting people where they are, not expecting them to meet you where you are. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I got a little jabbled there. You have to go to a place where they're comfortable, and you have to be willing to meet them where they are. And I don't mean that necessarily a physical sense of the location in which you meet, but I mean it more in an emotional state of understanding how you can show up for them in the way that they need you to in that moment. And I often find that comes down to body language and active listening, right? And energy. You have to be willing to give your time and your energy. And that's one of the greatest things we can share with other people. You don't need to be someone who has an unlimited wealth of financial resources. You need to be someone who's willing, right? Willing to listen, willing to show up, willing to be present, willing to learn, to be wrong, to understand together, to grow together. And it could be something as simple as taking the time to answer an email, right? If Talia makes a connection for me, everyone is meaningful. Everyone is deserving of my time for me to reach back out and say, hey, how can I help you? What should I know? How can I learn from you? And creating space for that person to then come back to it in a way that's meaningful to them and when they're ready. And I think it's just continuous, right? Like you don't need to be necessarily doing it through an email or through LinkedIn, though those are great resources to be engaged in our community. It's being engaged in our community. We say so much, be engaged in your community, but what does that mean, right? It is literally being there and being open and being observant to experiences and people and taking the time to step into them and to step out of your own day and your own life and your own experience for a moment, to just step back and look around you. And I think when you do that, when you have the privilege of being in that kind of conversation with someone, you feel it to this depth of your soul. Like you see it in their eyes, and like you have this feeling inside you that just makes you want to do more of it. How can I do more?
Yeah.
How can I help?
Could I add? So I identify as neurologically diverse, and I think one of the things that I have to answer.
What does that mean?
Means like my brain works uniquely, and I'm cool with sharing that with people. But I think for me, one of the things that means is also acknowledging that, to your point, maybe everyone doesn't feel comfortable sitting at the table, and me making sure that they can call in or being able to be present without being present.
Multiple pathways.
Is important. It's just as important as if they were there.
That's like show up with food, right? Like a really central thing to us is
Amen.
always.
Second.
And I'm feeling like horrible saying this because I did not show up with food today, but
I brought you a gift though. We did bring them gifts.
Oh, well, thank you.
So I don't think you would want to hear the sound of us chewing on this podcast, but show up with food. I think food creates this wonderful space to be engaged together. And like, even when people are visiting in town or just moving to Buffalo, and my first things to talk to them about is like, what do you like to eat? What do you enjoy? And it just becomes like instantaneous conversation around like a love of food, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Or the history of Dingus Day, which I'm all into.
Yeah.
Love Dingus Day.
So I think my time is up. I wish I could talk to you guys
Right
forever.
back at
We'd
you.
be happy to come back.
I mean,
I'm honored to be here.
Yeah,
I really
we're gonna
sincerely
have to have you guys back, and we're gonna have you talk with Beth because she's gonna get really down with the food stuff. But I have a question, and I always say I had a conversation with Adriana about me saying I have a question. I should just ask the question, but I got that from my wife because before I would never have that.
You just want to prepare people.
She says that all the time, and now I find myself saying that. But here is the question. You talked about, Rachel, you mentioned that people need to be open to being wrong, right? Whenever there is a stereotype, usually the stereotypes are wrong because people don't meet those stereotypes. In integrating networks and bringing people together, what has been something that you have found that you thought was right, but it was actually wrong?
My first response, not that it was actually wrong, but like my first response I'm going to let Rachel add is my relationship with poverty. Like when I grew up, being poor was something we were almost proud of. Like I wore that. Like we had food stamps. That was a way to show that we were surviving. But in the coming generations, when I talk to them about it, they have a different relationship with that word.
Yeah.
And it means different things to them from different communities, you know? So I had to a couple times take a step back and say, you know what, that word might be a trigger. It might mean different things to different people. And I might want to use other language. So that for me was a learning moment.
Yeah.
First, Kyria, I never have a question. I only have 1,000 questions. And I like to preface that with everyone I talk to is I have questions, not one, many. But I do find asking questions is a really great way to learn about people. I think one thing that we often get wrong is making assumptions about places, right? Like, oh, this just happens in the city. This just happens in the suburbs. This is a rural issue. And it's not. Whenever you're talking about people, you have things that are central to people, needs that are central to people that are not defined by boundaries of where you live or the neighborhoods that you're in. They're essential to a need you have, such as food. People in the rural communities struggle with food insecurity. People in the suburbs struggle with food insecurity and access. People in the city struggle with food insecurity and access, right? So like stepping back from spaces and places to think that this is just in one place, but to really step back and understand how can we talk differently as a community holistically, and then understand, respect, and appreciate the individual needs of neighborhoods and specific communities within that conversation.
Okay, so as we leave, one thing you want to leave the listener to think about.
I used to sit in the McCarley Gardens and stare over at the other side of the parking lot and think, oh my gosh, what are their lives like? And when I was parking, because my sister lived there, and when I was parking, I thought about the great privilege that I had to come here, the beautiful infrastructure, and why I'm really honored to be interviewed by you with Adriana, but also why I'm proud of the organization. And I'm just really grateful to be here.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, that gratitude is just, I feel like radiating through this room, and certainly I feel the same way. I'd say pause, right? Like we are caught up in moving so quickly in our days right now. I don't know how we're knocking on the door of June, but time moves fast. Life is fast. Take a minute and stop. Be present, whether that's with your partner, with your family, with your child, with your colleague. Just be present with them. Ask them, how are you today? And be willing to genuinely give an answer and listen to their answer, not just an I'm fine, right? What's our quick go-to? Everything's fine. The world's fine. I'm good. We're all good. Create that space for them. Have that pause in your day and be present in it.
Wow, that is great wisdom. Thank you so much. I'm going to implement both of those, just being grateful and pausing. So thank you so much for your time. It has been a great conversation, and I look forward to speaking with you ladies again.
It's been an honor. Thank you.
Such a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the Talking Cities podcast with Matt Enstis and friends. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast on all podcast streaming platforms. Talking Cities is brought to you by the Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus, dedicated to furthering economic growth, igniting urban revitalization, and building a strong, thriving community. Using our mutual city methodology, we foster conversation and collaboration among anchor institutions, partners, and the community. Together, we address critical issues including job and business opportunities, healthy and active living, entrepreneurship, energy, access, and transportation. The Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus, working together to change our city's future.